But if I have to be in a binary, I can't be a part of it because for a Black neurodivergent woman to always exist in a binary code of this system of reality, I can no longer do it. And what am I willing to gain in a loss? Is peace of mind and humanity.
Welcome to the Kindness Is podcast, presented by Kind Cotton, where we take a deep dive into the true meaning of kindness. I'm your host, co-founder of Kind Cotton, Kaitlin Johnstone. Let's dive in. Hey y'all, welcome back to another episode of the Kindness Is pod. It is Disability Pride Month, and I am so excited about the guests that I'm going to have on the podcast this month. First up is Myisha T. Hill. She is a writer, podcaster, life coach, and healer who's leading a revolution of heart, mind, and soul. Her work awakens others to purposeful passion and serves as a guide towards personal accountability and intergenerational healing, something we all need deeply. Learn more by diving into her book, Heal Your Way Forward, The Co-Conspirator's Journey to an Anti-Racist Future. I hope you love this week's episode as much as I do as we dive into the intersections of racial and disability justice. Myisha, I am so happy to have you here today. Thanks for joining me.
Oh man, you're so welcome. Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Me too. It's interesting. So this is going to come out on July 1st. And there's two things to me that struck me as really interesting about this week. One is that it is Disability Pride Month. We are kickstarting that. So I'm really grateful to have you on for that too. And it's also 4th of July. So a lot of the times when I think of all of the work that you do, right, I really am excited to have this conversation about how anti-racism work and disability pride are kind of interconnected.
I would agree. It's really interesting, right? There's actually 4 things. Can I give you 2 more things that are happening?
Yeah, give me all the
Okay,
things that are
it's
happening.
also Minority Mental Health Awareness Month. So this is a timely conversation because this month, 6 years ago, is when I launched Check Your Privilege, which was to help white folks identify how their basically intersections impact the mental health of Black, Indigenous, and other bodies of culture. So this is a very timely conversation, actually, when I think of like Disability Pride Month and the 4th of July, and it being Minority Mental Health Awareness Month, right? And then me just birthing the work that I do. I think we really never consider, right, how ableism and minority mental health is tied together. Because for so long as someone, and the 4th of July, right? Because if we look at my ancestors, the 4th of July wasn't a celebration, right? In fact, it may have been a temporary break, but they were still being in chattel enslavement, right? And then if you look throughout history, then you had Jim Crow, and then you had so many things happening where, we really weren't free and we really didn't experience freedom. And so I could imagine what was the 4th of July like for Harriet Tubman, right? Who had a disability that we don't talk about, right? Maybe this was a month where she was intentionally going out on in this time period, freeing slaves because she knew what it meant for white bodies in that time period. So yeah, there's a lot to think about in this conversation.
There is. So first of all, I shared a little bit in the intro, but can you just tell people about your work, about your beautiful book, about what inspired you to take a project like this on?
So I'm a writer, a public speaker. I have the work of Check Your Privilege, which helps all of us dismantle our collusion with the interlocking systems of domination, imperialist, capitalist, ableist, white supremacy, and patriarchy, and hold ourselves responsible to it as we heal in community. And my book, Heal Your Way Forward, was kind of like a guidebook to people to see themselves as whole and human on the journey, because of a lot of the books that are out there are rooted in shame. Use shame as a weapon to help transform people to change. And we are seeing in real time that shame is not working. A binary thinking is not working. You can't shame people away to take their healing journey. And so let's start out as a conversation. It's like, let me just talk to my white women friends and see what they're doing. And then those conversations led to workshops And those workshops led to building a community that's been around for 6 years. Um, and the practice of beloved community, how to be a hot mess, how to be an over emotional woman, how to regain, right, your own humanity. Because as Bell Hooks said, we self actualized in community, we not in rugged individualism. And so for me, the work of Check Your Privilege was birthed from pain, to bring in like a collective understanding of what's possible in community. And so it's a very countercultural approach to do anti-racism work, but as a multi-hyphenate who's into healing, whether it's water healing, whether it's breath work, mindfulness, the work of Check Your Privilege is really about transforming, transmuting, right? And building like deep relationships within and across racial difference. And it's a lot of work, but I know what's possible because we've been in community doing it and building it. And then I also have at the time before Check Your Privilege, I had a nonprofit called Brown Sisters Speak, where I would get with Black women for about it's been about 8 to 10 years now, 8 years, and we would have conversations around our mental health and what matters, and have shared space. So Check Your Privilege initially was the fundraising efforts for Brown Sisters Speak. And now we're called the Iwasan Collective, which means the Healers Collective. And we are having sister circles virtually and in person, and working to just kind of extend our programming for Black, Indigenous, and other bodies of culture to have safe, sacred space to do our ritual and healing work. So, yeah, I'm kind of pretty, all over the place, with my core message is healing, um, self recovery in community, and finding our way forward.
That is so beautiful though, and I like to consider myself that too, right? Like it's like, wait a second, she came out with a podcast. I thought this was just clothes, and she's donating all these inclusive books, and she's, writing her own children's book, and I'm like, well, that's okay because we're all not just one-dimensional beings, right? Like
Exactly.
similarly to you, I look at it as like this overarching message of redefining kindness. Like that's at the root of everything I do and everything I love and everything I'm passionate about. So it might be an impactful tea that also will provide an inclusive book. And then we have the opportunity to talk to all these people about their definitions of kindness throughout this work. And wait a second, I've been talking about this for 7 years now. I want to write a kids book about it so that they can have these conversations too. So it's really exciting for me to chat with someone who is quote unquote all over the map, but in all of the most beautiful ways. And I think what you're doing is really impactful. And I think it's really different in comparison to the anti-racism work that is out there. And that's really interesting to me because I say I've been on my anti-racism journey, I mean, really in depth for maybe like the past 7 years, but Trayvon Martin was kind of like my George Floyd. And I say that because many white women kind of woke up at George Floyd, right? And said, what can I do? How can I change these systems? Where can I learn? How can I do more? And throughout my personal journey, a lot of it has been rooted in shame. And having been a former kindergarten teacher, right? Like I always relate things back to education and learning because we're still learning as adults. Children never learned via shame. There's a lot of research out there, right? That those old clip charts, which I hope no one is using anymore, where children would have to go up to the front of the room and if they were quote unquote misbehaving, would have to clip down, was a huge thing until we all realized, hey, shaming kids in front of their peers isn't really motivating them to do better. And it's interesting that I've never made this connection with anti-racism work or any adult learning until you.
Shaming never works, shame or shaming. And a lot of us high end millennials, I'm not geriatric, I'm a high end because I like nice things. Um, I say that all the time. That's a shirt, by the way. It's coming out next week.
I love it.
Uh, but a lot of us, we're shamed. And our adverse childhood experiences, the science is showing, based on our adverse childhood experiences, that's why we get so caught, right? And I believe it was Tamala Gordon who put on Threads white guilt capitalism. I don't want to take credit for it, but I believe it was Tamala. Um, this notion of what happens when there's harm is that there's a white guilt capitalism that shows up, and shame is what sucks you into that capitalism. So then it's a performance. You're not really
Mm.
seeking transformation. You're just seeking a to-do list. Even the idea, I remember in 2020, everyone's like, what do I do? And I'm like, you don't do the work, you live it. It's an embodiment, which is why I've moved from like, I don't do anti-racism work. I teach people how to live into their life. And anti-racism is just an extra extension of who they are. It's not separate. But we are a culture of over-identifying because, again, let's think about queerness being different, right? Like being queer even has its, or even being disabled. Like I have autism. Um, and saying that out loud feels good because I can no longer mask. But there's something about doing anti-racism work that's rooted in this like white guilt capitalism and shame is a form of masking because you can mask I'm doing the work.
That's so interesting. And I'm actually curious your thoughts on this because there are many times when I'm speaking when I feel like it's important for me to use the parts of my identity. So like when I'm talking to, let's say, other white women, I often will state that I am a white cis, sorry, my mind like totally blanked there. A white cis straight passing woman. Um and I feel like it's important to share that, but now you're making me think about a lot of things. But I think I get what I'm saying, what you're saying are totally different, right?
Oh
Like
yeah,
a lot of
yeah.
times it's important to not only
It's
dive
important.
into our identity, but for
Oh
me to
yeah,
express my different identities and how that relates to the privilege that I carry
absolutely.
in this world.
Yep,
You're
that's
almost,
different.
yes, 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 because you're alluding to this, almost like clickbait of shaming people into doing the work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. That's what I'm speaking to. You as a person in a white body, it is important to name your intersections
Hmm.
because when you can name those explicitly, it gives other people permission and actually courage to name theirs.
Yeah.
Right? So there is that part of your story and naming that matters. I think what happens is when you see it used as a tool of weaponization and a tool of capitalism. So yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Something that we all hopefully can break free from. Before we move on to a little bit more about disability pride, I do want to talk for a moment about something that you say all the time that I find to be so beautiful is that relationships, particularly in our society, are transactional. And what you're trying to do with Check Your Privilege and with all of the work that you do is move away from being transactional and moving into being transformative. Can you talk about that for a moment?
The work we do in liberation and in collective humanity, it thrives on building relationships. And what has happened is that we're all indoctrinated and we have these like individual silos of families, right? Where conflict is modeled to you, how you are in relationship is modeled. And then you get older and you have this idea of that's what relationships is. But you're like just constantly on this hamster wheel of, well, if I do this, this person will treat me better. Or if I show up for them in this way, this, so it's like the if this, then that dichotomy I'm describing. And it's always this mindset because of capitalism, because we're born in this system, it's the more you do for others, the more you overgive, you're essentially just transacting, right? So a transformational relationship is really rooted in slowing down and really getting to know someone on a very human level, not just on the level of, oh, we're taking this class with Myisha, and this is a live experience. I have people who are builders in my community, and it was just like they ask each other, well, why are we here? And they're like, well, we're just here for Myisha. No, that's transaction because you're here because Myisha offers a skill or a gift, but you're not in relationship with each other. So literally to get from transacting with the black woman in charge, which is so weird because I don't know where that even came from. But that's the transactional nature of relationships. Black woman commodity. I'm just here to learn from her, extract. I'm not here to connect. So if you're only in spaces and relationships where there's just constant extraction and no connection, that's transaction. And transformational is connected and deeply rooted with relationship agreements and conflict agreements. Because you also have to know, to be in relationship, you also hopefully are willing to repair. And that's where conflict is the teacher, is how do we get from this conflict into reparative relationships? And still, again, bell hooks, remain in touch with each other's humanity to take
Mhm.
accountability.
Which I think now more than ever is so important. Like, I can't begin to express to people, at least for me personally, but I really believe this is going to be a collective global feeling for everyone, the importance of actual community, right? Like,
Hmm.
there is just all of these horrific things happening all over the globe, all of these things that our generation is going to have to face that is different from anything that has ever went down before, and we need people to be with who we truly deeply love that we can get through this with, right? Like, I can't think of a more important time to be connected to one another. So I thank you for explaining that and for building the community that you're building and doing everything that you do, because it's really crucial. So I hope you feel valued and seen in all that you are doing. So I want to know, to jumpstart this other like piece of our conversation, which it's been interwoven throughout. But I want to know why you think it's important to have a Disability Pride Month.
Well, first of all, it's almost like, why is it important to have a Black History Month, right?
Exactly.
Because
Yeah.
disability is not celebrated, right? It's always othered. I mean, if you look at the history of the mental health care system, it was built on disability. People who were born with deformities, people who were born who didn't fit the norm. And then when you add the layer of Blackness to it, holy moly, it took it to a whole nother level. So I think it's important to celebrate it as a reclamation, that disability is not a bad word. I think that's Mary Fashik who says that.
Hmm.
Um, I was trying to cite my sources, but disability is not a dirty word. I mean, it's something to celebrate. When my kids were first diagnosed before me, I would always reinforce, don't let the label distract you, right? Disability is not dirty world. For a long time, I used different ability because I was still socialized that disability was bad. But it's
Hmm.
important because it's reclamation. It's the human spirit. It's acceptance. It's liberatory. It's the acceptance of difference, right? It's similar to the work of anti-racism. How do we take pride that we are disabled? You know what I mean? Even still, I go disabled because who created the word disability, right? So I sit with that, but it's important to have it because it's the reclamation of our spirit and our soul in a society that has taken so much away from us as disabled individuals.
So I imagine that you were diagnosed later in life, because you said your kids were
Hmm.
diagnosed prior to you. Did that come about through noticing things in your children that you were like, wait a second, hold on
Yeah,
here? Okay. Can you share
it
about
came
that a little
about.
bit?
Absolutely. So it came about actually. Remember, my son was born, my oldest son, and I was looking and I'm like, something's not right. And doctors, he's fine. He's just a little delayed. And then I watched the Temple Grandin movie
Mm,
and I saw so many similarities. I said, my son has autism. And the doctors only gave me sensory processing disorder. So in his therapies, like occupational therapy and this and that, I said, and just doing my own research as a woman, I mean, not necessarily as a mother, I'm like, my son is autistic. Like, there's nothing anyone can tell me. And if it's not autism, it's Asperger's. At the time, that was still a
yeah,
diagnosis.
yeah.
And I just kept doing my research. I would be up at night looking in university archives and getting like, like you see in the movie how a woman will get her own board. Literally, that was me with Google Drive and sticky notes. And that's when I started noticing the same patterns. Like, okay, wait a minute. There's certain things going on with my older son that goes on with me. And then my other two children were born. In that time period, I did a geniogram and I had to kind of, it's something we do in one of our community groups, but lay out a visual representation of my family's trauma. And so I was able to identify, I had one uncle who reminded me of my son and my brother. And then I started looking at other family members and I'm like, wait a minute. And then finally, my son was in fourth grade, going into fourth grade when he was finally diagnosed with autism. Took me
Mm.
from four years to get an official diagnosis. And that's when I was like, okay, based on his test. And then all my other kids, I ended up taking my daughter and my middle son through early intervention and self-referring myself just to make sure. Between the sensory processing diagnoses, early childhood therapy for my oldest son, um, self advocacy is how I found the diagnosis for myself too. So it was a lot of self work when I started to make the connections. And now when I speak to an elder of my family, she also thinks she's autistic. So
Mm,
there's something about autism in my family,
mm-hmm.
um, that has informed all of us of the journey that we're taking today.
Mm. And you led the way for that.
Yeah.
That's
So the
pretty
that
paramount. That's big.
Thank you. I think it also came from my therapist at the time doing the geniogram, having me pick everything out and says everything stops with you. And when he told me that at that moment, shout out to Northern Illinois University Psychology Department in DeKalb, Illinois, and this therapist. If I ever see him one day, I can't wait to give him a hug because he was the catalyst for my change as you see me today. But he says it stops with you. And I took it literal. Why not? I'm on the spectrum.
Yeah.
And in that moment, I started taking responsibility for getting diagnoses and needs met, regardless of what anyone says. If I have the intuitive knowing and I know and I've done my own research, I'm going to get to the bottom of things. And that's my autistic gift.
I love that you frame that as a gift because I, similarly to you, there's all these similarities I'm discovering today, Myisha. But I was just diagnosed last year, about exactly a year ago today, with ADHD.
Mm-hmm.
And there are so many things. It's that like creative person, right? That we talked
Yeah.
about earlier. I look at that as like my ADHD superpower. Yes, I may have forgot my keys 10 times today, or, before Myisha and I hopped on this podcast, I have my computer plugged in to my computer, the charger, but not into the wall. So we like cut out right away.
Mm-hmm.
There's all of these things that have been a part of me forever that were looked at in a negative light, right?
Mm-hmm.
She's forgetful. She's clumsy. She is overexcited about things.
Yep.
And I was very fortunate, and I'm sorry to the listeners who've heard this a million times, but I was very fortunate that I had parents who were like, no, she's not overexcited and like too much to handle. She's passionate and she's going to do things with that passion.
Mm-hmm.
And, she's not forgetful. She's just involved in a lot. So it was like this reframing that I fortunately had as a child, but there was still this piece of it that really made me two things: sad upon diagnosis, because like I
Yeah.
wish I would have known, because there's all this negative self-talk that we go throughout our lives. And
Mm-hmm.
now having this diagnosis, I'm like, I can really affirm myself more. And then
Absolutely.
there's also this like happiness, like, yes, like I am going to use this as my superpower and know that there are things about me that are different, but different makes us unique and powerful. So I love that you said
Absolutely.
that.
I've been saying it recently because, with my intersection identity, and I also have ADHD. So I'm like, oh, whatever the acronym is, I don't say it. I'm both,
Oh,
but so we have
yeah.
so much to connect on. But um, my intersections of being Black and autistic have me reclaiming it as a gift because for too long it was me being combative, dismissive. And I understanding that autism is a spectrum and so is ADHD a spectrum. It's important for me to say in this moment too that we also must recognize that for Black, Indigenous, and other bodies of culture, those diagnoses aren't widely accepted and like
Hmm.
not treated with the same humanity and compassion as our white body friends and family members. And so it's important as we reclaim this as our Pride Month that we also too like speak to the importance of saying the quiet part out loud that yes, we're all on the spectrum. Yes, it's there's a lot we connect with. And also let's also remember that bodies of culture, Black, Indigenous, Southeast Asian, Latin, like aren't really even, there's not a lot of research around how it shows up
Mm.
for us and in our bodies. And so we have to reclaim it as a gift because we have to know that to be autistic, to have ADHD, to have Asperger's, which does not exist anymore, is a celebration because so many of us within and across difference were shamed and gaslit And so calling it a gift is really what it is. I really think that, if you were to put if we had like an autistic or ADHD president, oh God, oh shit, the world would be different. And maybe
Mm-hmm.
they are, they just don't reclaim it. They don't celebrate it. They don't see the joy in it because it's hard, right, to see joy in something when you're demonized by it. But by
Mm-hmm.
reclaiming that sense of like gratitude and joy and like hope and excitedness for it, I think that's where I find my humanity outside of the labels of being a Black neurodivergent woman, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because I know it's something that we all want in our neurodivergent communities.
Yeah, and that's something that you shared earlier when we both asked, like, how are you? Like, how are you truly? Is that
Yeah.
we're all just healing our way forward, right? And trying to
Right.
find the moments of living between constant grief and joy. And I think
Hmm.
that is something that we could talk about with a million things, not just our neurodivergence, but
Yeah.
it's just kind of the nature of our realities nowadays. I mean, not everyone's. There are days where I'm like, man, do the blissfully ignorant people really know something that I don't know? But then I'm like, no, 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 no. They
Huh.
don't.
I, I actually want to go there because I actually think that they do. I actually
Mm,
think that there's something there. Let's be countercultural. I can know suffering exists, and yet I can still be in joy, holding the suffering in my heart, but not sitting in it. So I think the blissfully like ignorant people, there's there's something to their ignorance. Because I always get curious, like, well, what do you think about suffering? I guess for me, when I see someone like super blissful in that blissful ignorance, I'm always like, tell me about what you think about suffering. I get very
mm,
curious because I think they have something that a lot of us probably want, but we're afraid to go there. Not to be ignorant about pain and suffering, but there's something there. And then there are those who are in cults and are super do that super weird shit that are like, we're happy all the time and oh free. And I'm like, yeah, I get curious about that too. So
mm.
I really try to like just stay curious about where people are on their spectrum of emotions. Do the blissfully ignorant people know something that I don't know? Somehow it's always my invitation for myself.
Everyone is living in a moment in which it's either right or wrong, right? Like it has
Hmm.
been ingrained in us. And there are things in life that need to step outside of that binary way of thinking. And I think people have a really, really, really tricky time doing that.
Yeah. Um, I really believe in the power of the both and.
Mm,
Growing up with a disability, for example, it's very inflexible to someone's disability to force them to sit down all day if their neurodivergence doesn't allow them to, right? So a both and mindset, right? Getting out of the binary is recognizing that the multiple truths do exist, right? And that takes compromise, and it also takes um, expanding our understanding and embracing complexity. Um, the both and mindset is really rooted in the empathy, connection, inclusivity. Um, and it's how do I sit with this and that's the question I go back to. I think Bell Hooks, Audre Lorde, they give really great frameworks that I like to work with. I like to work with the ancestors' work, the elders' work, and not reinvent the wheel. But it's how do I sit with this and you know what I mean?
mhm.
Because as someone with a disability who's been told that they're a bad writer and they'll never do this and never that, you're being harmful to me. So how do I keep you accountable to being harmful for me and speaking to my own life and my own life experience? Nuance matters more than I think we all know. And I think the gift of neurodivergence is that many of us actually intuitively know on the neurodivergent scale the importance of a both and because we've been demonized by a system and the people within the system for so long to be on this one line, this one way
Mm.
of thinking and being and learning. And I think without this both and mindset, without moving into the nuance, we're we keep saying burn it down, but we're going to build the same thing because we're not even ready for both and like both
Mhm.
and feels like a fight for yourself and it feels like you're turning on yourself and it also might feel like you're turning on the collective, right? And nuance is hard in this current moment of both and like can I, say free Sudan, Congo, Tigray, Myanmar, Haiti, and Palestine, and hold space for people whose family are being held hostages by Hamas?
Mm-hmm.
Can I say free Palestine, Haiti, Tigray, Sudan, Congo, Haiti, Myanmar, and wrestle with my internalized and externalized anti Semitism when it does show up? Maybe not in this context. And I've lost a lot of friends.
It's okay. Your feelings are valid.
And I'm okay with that
Mm-hmm.
because I'd rather trust the nuance
Mm-hmm.
than stay in the binary.
I feel that deeply, Myisha, like very, very deeply. So I see you.
And if you have to lose people for your own peace of mind and for your own beliefs, that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? My doors are always open for reconciliation and repairing friendships. But if I have to be in a binary, I can't be a part of it because for a Black neurodivergent woman to always exist in a binary code of this system of reality, I can no longer do it. And what am I willing to gain in a loss? Is peace of mind and humanity.
I don't want to end here, but it was so beautiful. Before we go, first of all, can you share where people can follow you and support you? Because I want everyone to do that.
Yes, you can follow me at Myisha T Hill or Check Your Privilege on Instagram. You can find me at myishathill.com and it'll point you in all the directions, hopefully.
Awesome. And this came up a million times throughout the podcast, and I'm grateful for this conversation. But I do ask everyone, if you had to come up with your own definition of what true kindness is, what would that be to you?
True definition of kindness would be embracing the both and,
Mm,
trusting our common humanity, and mm, and making space for one another, even when we don't agree.
I love that. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you all so much for listening to this episode of the Kindness Is podcast. If you love it and it's adding even a little bit of value to your life, we would love, love, love if you could subscribe, rate, and review so we can reach even more people and make this world a little bit more kind.